Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. All protocols are still observed. I am Petal Jetoo, National Science Coordinator within the Ministry of Education. And I would like to share some information with you. Now, science is, as we all know, a core subject from grades 1 to 9 within our formal education system, which means students ages 6 to about 14 are all studying some form of science or the other within the formal system. Yet, when we get to the CSEC level, less than 20% of our students enroll in the single sciences in Guyana. I've looked at data for over the past 10 years. Within the region, within the Caribbean, it was Buentrada-Tiwari in 2015 who reported that less than 7% of the Caribbean's youth enroll in the single sciences in the Caribbean region. CARICOM has recognized that we just have about 15% of our cohort in science and technology. Science and technology are identified by the United Nations and other international organizations and by ourselves as key drivers or the vehicles for socio-economic development within the framework of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We have goal number 4 that deals with quality education for lifelong learning. But let's look at the word science for a minute. Science is really the Latin word which means knowledge or translated knowledge. And when we talk about science education and teaching reforms in science education, teaching should be that process that facilitates the development of knowledge. However, over the past years, we've noticed that we've had some kind of an education, or we've all been trapped in an education system where when we hear about science, we think about writing lots of notes. And maybe the ends of our fingers got flat at some point in school with the piles of notes that we collected from our teachers. I was one of those at some point. And then you are tasked with homework and you memorize those notes, and then you write an examination at the end, and you probably do very well. You get 90% or 100%, and you are looked at as bright and you got all the right answers. But the reality is, science is not a subject, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of transforming information into knowledge. It is what it is, it's the process more than a bit of notes on paper. And this is what I want to talk about. And we need to learn about science, therefore, in transforming the teaching of science. We need to learn about science, through science, for science. And this is what I want us to leave with. That learning about science through science means learning through the use of the scientific method, where we look at problems, we identify these, we make observations, and we propose solutions. And this is what reorients science education for sustainable development. And so we've heard about relevance and the changing of landscapes within our education system. And we need to teach these skills of observation and investigation and experimentation, which then brings us to what the UN Learning Pillars talk about: learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and learning to transform ourselves and our societies. And this is where we worked over the last 10 years with UNICEF and UNESCO, and we've managed over 10 projects. And right now we have a policy that deals with education for sustainable development that talks about the integration of sustainable development in education, and talks about education being the pillar, one of the main pillars for sustainable development. The policy looks at 4 pillars, and capacity building, of course, is the first pillar. We cannot transform our thinking and our teaching in science education if it is not fitted within the relevant management structure of science and technology, of research and development, and of all the other infrastructures that we require. We heard about education being site-specific and relevant for communities from our last speaker. Sustainability is site-specific. The solutions for Guyana's problems are not written in the textbooks that we import. We therefore have to build that research capacity And we have to develop the skills through science and technology to be able to come up with our own solutions. These also are not written in the textbooks. So this is the kind of science education and transformation and teaching that we're looking towards, that we're working towards. And so we've embraced through a collaboration several years ago with the Chilean Academy of Sciences and the Caribbean Academy of Sciences to promote what we have now in our strategic plan as inquiry-based science education, which really takes the scientific method and uses it as a teaching tool, which takes the student into science and not learning about science, but learning about facts and methods and figures, but learning about the process itself, learning to know by learning to do. Because if we leave out the doing, the hands-on and the experience, and I'm always motivated by the CI videos that says nature does not need people, people need nature. And the definition that caught my attention, which deals with the purpose of science, really talks about the purpose of science in the context of sustainability, is to really understand and clarify the dynamics of what is required to prevent the human system, ourselves, individual and collective, physical, social, economic, cultural, and psychological, from destroying the environment on which we all depend. This means that the human-nature relationship is important for us to be able to live on planet Earth. While we talk about freedom in education and reform in education, we have to put this freedom in the context of our planetary boundaries. And this is where science comes in as the little s within the big S, the small s, science within the bigger S of sustainability in our very survival. And that small s will be our effort to understand our planet. After all, the definition for science is the human effort to understand our environment. And as I always say to some of our students, and they get very excited, the trees don't study us, the fishes don't study us, we study them. So it is our limited understanding of nature that has led to its destruction. It therefore now means that we unleash our limited understanding into a new freedom, a new kind of understanding that brings us into connection with nature to achieve sustainable development. And this is where science and technology fits in. Technology is really the cultural application of science. Science can only be applied so far as the culture of a place and people allow it. And this is where we need to get our definitions clear and to really put these into transforming the teaching of science and in our schools, bridging the gap between formal, informal, and non-formal education. Thank you very much.